All right, everybody, welcome back to the Horn Takes podcast. We're doing Horn Takes live today on YouTube. Talk about the wide receiver room today. We're just running through all the position groups. Offensive line will be next week. I'm excited about that. If y'all don't know, y'all should know, and now you know. I love those big guys. I used to be one of the big guys, so I got a special place in my heart for those big offensive linemen. Today we're going to do the recruiting roundup. Again, we're going to talk about the wide receivers and the tight end position. Little look ahead at the Week 3 opponent for the University of Texas, Wyoming Cowboys. And then we'll opine a little bit about this Big 12 Media Days. There was some good stuff at the Big 12 Media Day. And then there was some pretty ridiculous stuff at the Big 12 Media Day. Before we get started on all that, check us out on Twitter, @HornTakes, TikTok, @HornTakes. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Again, we'll be working on all kinds of different content for you guys. We're working on trying to build a network of folks so we can have some guests on the show. And then there's the traveling road show we're going to be doing at Alabama, in Tuscaloosa, at the Red River Shootout, at the Texas State Fair, and then down in Austin for sure for that final game against Texas Tech. I'm thinking about maybe doing a K-State game as well at home. We'll see how that one goes. Not a whole lot going on from a recruiting perspective in the last week or so since we had the last show, but we did get a couple of commitments, and we lost one, so let's talk about it. Aaron Hampton, 4-star athlete out of Daingerfield, Texas. He was originally a Baylor commitment. This is back in, I think early 2022. He was committed to Baylor. He decommits from Baylor, commits to Texas at some point in 2022. And then late in 2022, I believe December, he decommits from Texas, opens his recruitment back up. Ends up being a recruiting battle between Alabama and Texas. He went ahead and committed. This is a really outstanding player. It's really interesting. I grew up not too far from Daingerfield, Texas, and it is absolutely crazy the amount of athletes coming out of that place because it's not a big place at all. Daingerfield's a small little place, as a lot of these Northeast Texas schools and towns are. But they've had a pretty good run of putting some good athletes out, and including several that have played for the University of Texas. Aaron Hampton, his junior year, I mean, he had close to 1,100 yards receiving. He's an absolute nightmare. Really good speed. He's not a big guy, but he plays strong, plays physical. He's just so fast, like people can't even catch up with him. So that's a good get for Texas. I think he fits in good in a slot type role, maybe even in a Keelan Robinson type role down the line as Keelan moves on after this year. And then the other guy, Melvin Hills, out of Lafayette, Louisiana. He's a 3-star defensive tackle. I call him a tweener. He's like 6'3", 270 pounds. So he's not quite your 300-pound, prototypical inside college guy. He's also not quite your, 6'4", 6'3", 225, 235-pound edge guy either. So I'll call him a tweener, and I think that's why his star rating is a 3-star. I think he's a really good player. He's just kind of in between positions. So I think the challenge for Melvin Hills and the Texas staff when he gets to Texas is, if we want him to play inside, how do we beef him up? That's quite a bit. He's 200, like I said, 270 pounds. You really want your guys to be, 300 pounds and bigger, right? So I think that's the challenge there. His coach, I don't know much about this group, but there's a group out of Louisiana called the Edge Assassins, and I read a quick little blurb about it. The guy that runs it has a lot of other guys that are talented defensive linemen that go to him for pass rushing drills and skills and just making them better players. He raves about Melvin Hills, so we'll see what happens with old Melvin Hills. Glad to have him. Anytime you can pull a recruit out of a state like Louisiana, where there's a lot of good football players, and LSU's kind of on an uptrend right now with Brian Kelly and some of the things they did last year, I think that's good for Texas recruiting. I think the miss we had recently, it hurt my heart. I know that a lot. If you've been watching the show the last few weeks, you know what I think about Jaden Jackson. Jaden Jackson was a guy at a IMG Academy there in Florida. He was on the recruiting visit a couple of weekends ago, 2 or 3 weekends ago, the big one they had with lots of 5 stars, including several of his teammates, a couple of which have committed to Texas since that recruiting weekend. But I didn't know much about Jaden Jackson until that recruiting visit. I started watching a little bit of his film, and, man, I really, really like Jaden Jackson. He's a 3-star on 247. He's a 4-star composite. This guy is an absolute wrecking machine in the middle of a defensive line. Guys just bounce off of him. He's got to be just a really strong kid. He's obviously a big kid. I think 6'2", 300 pounds, something like that. He's really explosive. His first step is amazing. Again, just watching his film, if you like to sit there and watch, high school players play, he's a really good one to go watch. He's like again, I don't know any other way to say it than he's a wrecking ball. Bull in a china cabinet, some sort of phrase like that. That's this guy. I really, really, really was excited about where Texas stood with him coming out of that visit. And what I've heard is Jaden Jackson has played stuff really close to the vest. And I don't mean that to say he's misleading anybody. I think he's just a private guy. He was waiting to let the world know what he was going to do on his time, which I think is fine. But I think Texas felt like they were in a good spot. And then sort of late in the game, like the last few weeks, it started to become, there was a lot of talk about Oklahoma and a lot of talk about Ohio State. So I don't know where Texas finished in this battle for Jaden Jackson, but he committed to OU yesterday. So OU got a good one. At least they have a commit. I say recruit through the whistle. To me, this is a guy that you try to figure out how to get back on campus this fall, and you just recruit until signing day. He's that good. We talked a little bit last week about who Texas was in good shape with, and I don't think that list has changed too much. You got Wardell Mack, you got Brandon Baker, Colin Simmons, Ryan Wingo, Kobe Black, Corian Gibson, who's set to announce on July 22nd, and then DeAndre Robinson, big 4-star defensive lineman out of Orlando. He was set to announce on the 21st, but he has now moved that to the 20th. And then Zena Umeozulu is a defensive end out of Allen, Texas. I don't know about him. You never know with these recruits, but as soon as Jaden Jackson committed to Oklahoma, you started seeing a lot of tweets from other recruits and players and things like that. And Zena Umeozulu was one of them. And I think, man, damn it, this is the saddest thing ever. I think he completed a Boomer Sooner with the Sooner part of it on a tweet from Jaden Jackson. So I don't know what that means. These kids, you never can quite tell what they're going to do. I know that Oklahoma is recruiting him very heavily. So we'll see what happens with that one. How the class ranks right now, they're 17th with 14 commits. I said last week I think this class will wind up in a top 5 type class. I might back off of that one a little and say top 10. You just don't know what's going to happen, man. There's enough firepower in the pipeline, right? There's enough guys that Texas is currently targeting that if they get a lot of those guys, they can have like a top 5 type class. You just don't know what's going to happen. I'm sure, A&M's picked up some recruiting momentum here in the last week or so. A lot of these guys are getting recruited by A&M. And then there's the usual suspects, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, that are right here close. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'll tell you this. I think if Texas goes out and handles their business this season and has a really good season, wins the Big 12, I think a lot of these recruits that are kind of sitting back and waiting could end up at Texas. And I think Texas will be able to find some guys they can flip late. It seems like Sark always figures out a way to pull in some guys late, flip some guys late. So we'll see how that goes this year. Position groups. We've been breaking them down. We've already done the quarterbacks. We've done the running backs. Today we're going to do the wide receivers and the tight ends. And I know, folks, those are not the same position, but they're pass catchers. And frankly, we don't have enough time until the college football season kicks off. We're 50 days away, folks. 50 days away from Texas football. And there's college football coming in like 43 days. So we're getting close. We're getting close to being inside of a month for football. You're starting to see all the conferences have their media days. And that's really, to me, that's kind of like the signal that football is close, right? And then players will start reporting. I think fall camp for Texas starts August 2nd. So we'll start to have some reports coming out of fall camp. They'll all be bullshit because half of these guys don't really have sources. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, guys. Y'all have sources. But honestly, you know, I can remember back in the day, you know, like the late 2000s, when things started to kind of go downhill for Texas. And that wasn't really the late 2000s. That was, you know, 2010, 2011. So real late 2000s and early 2010s. Just every single fall, there was all this talk about, oh yeah, this group is looking more aggressive than ever. And, you know, but so you got to take all that stuff with a grain of salt. But we'll start to get some reports out of the fall camp, and I'm excited about that. Let's talk about these wide receivers and tight ends. First of all, when you talk about this group of players, a whole lot of wide receivers and tight ends portaled out from Texas this year. You had, you know, notably you had guys like Jaleel Billingsley, the Alabama transfer from the year before. He didn't have a very good season at Texas. I think he only had one catch. Not a lot of catches. And then Agiya Hall's another guy that transferred out of Bama into Texas. I know a lot of Texas fans were excited about him. Just an ultra-talented player. Oh, by the way, Jaleel Billingsley has decided he didn't go into the portal, actually. He's in the NFL draft, which I don't think that worked out for him. So I don't know what Jaleel Billingsley is doing. Agiya Hall transferred. I have no idea where he transferred to. Generally, when players say, I'm leaving Texas, it's not like a hate thing for him. I don't have enough energy and time and effort to put in to follow these guys. I have a job, and then I do this for fun. So I don't know where Agiya Hall went, but I know ultra talented kid. A lot of Texas fans were super, super excited about getting that transfer, and it just didn't work out. Brennan Thompson's a guy that was recruited early on in Sark's tenure here at Texas. Real fast kid. Guess I don't know. I don't know what goes down. I'm sure it's different for every player, but he decided to transfer. I mean, he got some playing time last year, so I don't know. And then Troy Omieri is a guy, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. This guy was awesome. Had two really good falls in a row at the University of Texas and just couldn't stay healthy. Tore his ACL both fall camps. He's gone on to one of the smaller Texas schools, I believe, is where he transferred to. But that's a kid I'm really pulling for because he's got a lot of talent, and he just couldn't, like we said, couldn't stay healthy. Tough to play football when you can't stay healthy. And there's a lot of other guys, too, that transferred out, moved on. So I wouldn't call it like a big rollover because you still got the main cogs, and Texas was also able to bring some guys in the transfer portal. Some guys left over from last year from the transfer portal that were hurt. Let's talk about them. So first of all, this wide receiver. We'll start with the wide receivers. We'll move on to the tight ends. Wide receiver room, sort of widely considered one of the most talented in the country. I don't think there's a lot of people out there that wouldn't have them in their top 10. There's some folks that think they're like a top 2 right behind Ohio State. I don't know about any of that. It doesn't really matter. They're talented. So let's run down who we're talking about here. We got Worthy, Xavier Worthy. He's been there a couple years now. Had a really outstanding freshman season. It's kind of coming off of a sophomore slump. We did air quotes there, podcast folks. Because he had a broken hand. Dude played with a broken hand half the season last year. Nobody knew it. But his slump was 60 catches for 760 yards and 9 touchdowns. His freshman season that garnered him, freshman All-American honors, 62 for 981 yards, 12 touchdowns. So this guy is an absolute producer. Thanks, Josh. Josh says he likes me okay, but he likes the other guy better. Anyway, whatever. I think the interesting thing about X is last year he was kind of, thrown into this role where he had to be the deep guy because Isaiah Nair got hurt in fall camp. Isaiah Nair was a guy that they brought in from Wyoming last transfer portal season. And man, what a talent he is. He's the type of guy that he's big, he's 6'3", 200-pound type guy. Really good hands that can really stretch the field. And I think, Texas is looking for guys that can stretch the field because that's what Steve Sarkisian wants to do. Unfortunately, he was the guy. He was kind of tapped as the guy that was going to be that downfield threat. If you remember watching the spring game a couple years ago, Ewers and him hooked up early in that game for a really long touchdown pass, a post, really clean route, really nice ball, right in time. He can get over the top in a hurry. But he was out. So Xavier Worthy kind of had to be that guy. And you started seeing it early in the season last year, especially that Alabama game. Quinn Ewers threw Xavier Worthy at least 2 deep balls. And Quinn Ewers only played in that game for 7 minutes of football. So Xavier Worthy kind of got put in a position that's not really his game. Now, he can get down the field. He's very fast. I think he struggles a little bit tracking the ball. And he had his drop issues. But really, Xavier Worthy's game is get me the ball in space really quickly and get some people out in front of me. And I can just wiggle around a little bit and then outrun everybody. Perfect example of that was the 2021 Red River Shootout, the very first play of the game. They run just a little bubble screen. He makes one guy miss, and he's gone down the sideline for 80 yards and a touchdown, or 75 yards and a touchdown. Would have been 80 under the old rules. But a lot of people have talked about, a lot of people had a problem with Xavier Worthy towards the end of last year, and I'll admit it, I was one of them. I did a podcast, and I talked about Xavier Worthy, and I said, look, man, this was back during the time where he was, there was all these rumors about him maybe going to USC, which was the second year in a row. There was all these rumors about him maybe going to USC to transfer, all this mess. And I'm just sitting here going, I'm Xavier Worthy'd out. He's an amazing talent, but if he doesn't want to be here and he doesn't want to do the things he needs to do to be as good as he hopes to be and thinks he is, then he just needs to go on. And it sounds like not my messaging probably. He probably didn't even know who the hell I am, which is cool. But it sounds like there was pressure on him from the people he does care about, which is the coaching staff, maybe his teammates. He's made a concerted effort this offseason to really commit to being a more mature person and improving his skill sets. Realizing I am very talented, but I still have a lot of things I can do to get better. The word out of the Texas Longhorns organization is that has happened. Xavier Worthy, we'll see. I'm excited. He's a big play waiting to happen, and I think it'll be really cool that hopefully let's get out of fall camp and play some games first, but hopefully he doesn't have to be the guy that has to stretch the defense all the time. Speaking of stretching the defense, A.D. Mitchell, transfer from Georgia. Man, this guy had touchdown catches in the last 2 national championships. He has catches in all 4 semifinal playoff games, or all 4 playoff games he's played in. I like to talk about, to me, this guy is a basketball player on a football field. And one of the things that I've never quite understood about wide receiver recruiting is why is it so hard to find good wide receivers? And I don't know the answer, except all I know is if I was a coach and I was trying to find some guys to come play wide receiver for me, I would recruit basketball players. I would be looking at guys that play basketball and play football because they can jump, they got good hands, they know how to time jumps to get to the ball at the right time. There's just a different skill set in basketball when you're talking about ball skills than there is in football. There's a difference, and I think a lot of coaches are real focused on. The route running piece of it, which I think is important. But I think it's good to just have guys that are just raw talents that can get down the field and will go get the football when you throw it up. And in a lot of cases, those types of guys end up being, your best players. And I think that's the type of guy A.D. Mitchell is. So I am super excited about A.D. Mitchell. I think he's going to be sort of the Isaiah Neyor role that we thought we'd see Isaiah Neyor in last year. He's going to play outside. He's going to get down the field. And he had a really great circus catch for a touchdown in that spring game. So I think all Texas fans are really, really excited about A.D. Mitchell. Jordan Whittington's a guy that seems like he's been at Texas forever. I think getting him back, there was a lot of talk about him moving on from Texas, whether he's going to the draft or I think he was thinking draft. I think he loves Texas. I don't think he had any intent of transferring out, but there was some discussion about whether, Jordan Whittington would be back. And when he announced that he was coming back, I was super excited about that. I think it's huge for Texas. He's a guy that's been he's been underutilized most of his career, and it's mostly due to injuries. No coach has tried to underutilize him. He just, for the first few years he was at Texas, he couldn't stay healthy. Finally, last year, he stays healthy. His career at Texas, 81 receptions, 1,081 yards, 4 touchdowns. I expect Jordan Whittington to catch 2 or 3, maybe even 4 this year. He might equal his career total this year. If you don't remember Jordan Whittington from high school, he played at Cuero, Texas. He was a kind of an all everything, but he was really a running back. I think he scored five or 6 touchdowns in the state championship game for Cuero his senior year. So he's a big kid. He's like 6'1", 2, when he was early in his career at Texas, 225 pounds. Supposedly he's slimmed down to 205, which that'll help his quickness, help his speed. And like we said, he finally turned in a full season last year. And, you look at his total production of 81 receptions for 1,081 yards. 50 catches of that and 652 yards came last year. So I expect big things out of Jordan Whittington. We talked about Isaiah Neyor earlier. Supposed to be the deep guy last year. I think, to me, he's kind of like a black sheep type guy or a dark horse guy for Texas in the wide receiver group this year. He tore his ACL last year in a non-contact injury in fall camp. Supposedly the recovery's going really well. He's been running routes. I think Isaiah Neyor is going to surprise a lot of people because a lot of people, when he got brought in through the transfer portal, a lot of people, well, first of all, people were like, who is Isaiah Neyor and why are we recruiting somebody from Wyoming? Then you go put the film on for this guy. Man, he's outstanding. So people got really excited really quick. Then he caught that touchdown pass in the spring game on a long post. And so people were really, really excited. And then he gets hurt, and you kind of haven't heard a lot of people talk about Isaiah Neyor. That's the only reason I say he might be a dark horse, because I don't think people are expecting him to do a whole lot. Casey Cane's another guy, 8 catches for 201 yards last year. Obviously, he can get down the field. This is another big body. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. Lots of speed. And then you talk about the freshmen. You got a couple guys coming in. Jonte Cook, super highly touted. I feel like he's kind of a X-worthy clone. He had a long touchdown catch in the spring game. Lots of speed. And then DeAndre Moore, he was a late recruiting flip for Steve Sarkisian. I think they flipped him from Louisville. He's got real good size, real good speed. He's got a little bit of the drops. He dropped a touchdown pass in the spring game right before Malik Murphy found his teammate and co-freshman Jonte Cook for a touchdown. So lots of talent there. Ryan Niblets, another speed guy, All-American type guy, All-State guy in high school. He had 55 catches for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns his senior year in high school. So the wide receiver group, and there's other guys I didn't mention, but I think that's going to probably be the names you hear about the most from the wide receiver group for the University of Texas. Again, super talented. Quinn Ewers is going to have no shortage of people to try to get the ball to. Should be a good year for those guys. Let's talk about the tight ends a little bit. Now, the tight end group, really heavy at the top, and then we don't know a lot about the rest of them. JT Sanders, outstanding player. A lot of NFL people think he's the second highest rated tight end in the country as you start talking about draft and things like that. He had 54 catches for 613 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. The interesting thing about JT Sanders is he played wide receiver in high school and defensive end. There was like a lot of discussion about where JT Sanders would play at the University of Texas. Would he be a defensive end? Would they move him to tight end? If they move him to tight end, can he even play tight end? I don't think he ever put his hand down on the ground on offense in high school. But he was a receiver. So really athletic, really good ball skills, and it showed up in a big way this year. I think if JT Sanders stays healthy, he's going to eclipse those numbers pretty easily. Gunnar Helm is more of like a second tight end. Like you want to bring the big guys in and get a lot of big blockers in there. That's Gunnar Helm. He's not much of a pass catcher. I think he can catch. He's not a huge threat like JT Sanders. JT Sanders can get down the field. JT Sanders can catch the ball, make people miss. There's really not much. I mean, I don't want to compare him to Bowers from Georgia, but he's that type of guy. I think that Bowers guy from Georgia is, man, he's probably in a league of his own, but that's the type of player JT Sanders is. And I think the most important thing for JT Sanders is he's learned how to block. He hasn't just embraced the fact that he's a good pass catcher and he's a good athlete and he's a mismatch down the field in the passing game. He's really bought into the fact that, you know, if I want to play and I want to be really good, I got to learn how to block and I got to be good at it. And towards the end of last year, you started to see it a lot, especially in that Baylor game. They really ran where JT Sanders was, and he made a lot of space for Texas running backs late in that game. Juan Davis is a guy that's been at Texas for a while. I think he's a junior. He had one catch as a freshman against Arkansas, and then after that, we haven't really seen a whole lot of him. I don't know that we'll see a lot of him this year. I think it's going to be a JT Sanders show. Excuse me. With 3 wide receivers. A couple freshmen came in this year. Spencer Shannon is a 6'7", 241-pound guy out of Mater D High School in California. Excuse me. And then Will Randall out of Isidore Newman. Arch's teammate, 6'4", 235 pounds. I haven't heard much about these guys since they arrived on campus. And honestly, I don't even know if they're on campus yet. These guys may not be early enrollees. In fact, I think I remember hearing that Will Randall was not going to be an early enrollee, so he won't come in until this summer at some point. Here pretty quick, I imagine. So who knows what we'll see out of those two guys. I know tight end is a worry for me, because if you have an injury with JT Sanders, we don't know what we have behind that. And I think Gunnar Helm could come in and do fine in the run game. He's a big kid. He blocks well. He's been doing it for a couple years at Texas now. I just don't know what he gives us in the passing game. So all in all, Texas fans, the wide receiver room, the tight end room, lots of talent, especially in that wide receiver room. Quinn Ewers will not be able to ever say from this point forward that, I just don't have enough weapons. He's got tons of weapons to throw to. Week 3 opponent, Wyoming Cowboys. I got to be honest with you guys. I don't know much about these Wyoming Cowboys. I think the last time I saw the Wyoming Cowboys play was when I was watching film when we landed Isaiah Nair. And before that, it was probably the last time Texas played Wyoming, which I know they've done it fairly recently. I just don't know exactly when that was. At any rate, Wyoming was 7-6 last year, 5-3 in the Mountain West Conference, which was good enough for third. They got 15 guys coming back, 10 of those on defense. And the defense, when I originally was digging into this, and I was like, oh, they got 10 returning starters on defense, but their defense probably sucks. Their defense was actually pretty decent. They had the 57th ranked total defense. They were, I think, points per game, 23 points per game. So a couple of points off of what Texas had last year from a points per game perspective. And Texas's defense wasn't amazing last year, but it was certainly much improved from the season before. And if you really go look at the top 10 teams last year, if I think Texas was 21 points a game, shaved 3 points a game off, and they're in the top 10. So close. So I think this Wyoming defense will be a lot tougher on Texas than you would probably think if you didn't know they had 10 guys coming back off a defense that was pretty good. Key returners on offense, Andrew Peasley at the quarterback position. He's a guy that was supposedly supposed to be in line for taking over the Utah program when Jordan Love left. And then I think he got hurt. And so he went ahead and transferred to Wyoming. He did not have a very good season last year. 10 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. He only threw for right around 1,500 yards. So not super good. And then on the offensive side, Trayton Welch, tight end, 22 receptions for 308 yards and 5 touchdowns. So half of the touchdown passes went to this tight end, Trayton Welch. Key returns on defense. The entire front seven is back for Wyoming. And again, don't watch them, but looking at stats, you got to think they're kind of led by their edge guys, Braden Siders and Devon Harris, 15 sacks combined. They've only lost one cornerback off this team on defense, starter-wise. Key losses on offense. They lost a 1,000-yard rusher with 8 touchdowns. They lost a 407-yard wide receiver with 2 touchdowns. And then a couple of offensive linemen. Key losses on defense, there's only one. Cameron Stone, 2 interceptions, 10 pass breakups. So if you look at this team, you got to figure the offense is going to struggle against Texas. But they might have the type of defense that, could keep Wyoming in the game. If Texas doesn't come into this game and take this game seriously, defense is kind of a great equalizer. If you can keep the other team from scoring long enough, somehow, some way, your offense finds a way to score, keep it close, and then you're only like a big play away. And that's kind of like that's pretty much the recipe for an upset. Stay close enough until the very end, and then a single play can make or break the game for you. Make one play, you win the game. So again, that defense is really experienced. It's statistically pretty good. But that offense is in rough shape. Talk about predictions for this game. I think this could be a trap game for Texas. They'll just be coming off the road from Tuscaloosa. It's a game sandwiched in between that Alabama game, 2 road games actually, that road game in Tuscaloosa and then a road game in Waco. Texas is ultra focused on winning the Big 12 this year. So this could be the type of game that they got to be careful, especially if they win that Alabama game. I think you go into Tuscaloosa, you win that Alabama game, you start to feel really good about yourself, which you should. But it's really easy for 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids to start feeling way too good about themselves and maybe looking ahead to Baylor. And like I said, I think Wyoming's got the type of defense that if Texas's offense isn't clicking, they could keep Wyoming in that game. I don't think any of that's actually going to happen. I think Texas is going to beat Wyoming by 3 scores in Austin to kind of round out that non-conference schedule. I just don't think – I think Texas's defense might score more points. I think Wyoming's defense might score more points against Texas than their offense will. We'll obviously talk more about this game the week of the game. Let's wrap it up with some Big 12 Media Day opining. I felt like watching that, and I didn't watch all of it. I didn't watch any of it really yesterday. I watched a few little snippets online of some interviews. But I tried to watch as much as I could on Tuesday. And it kind of just had this feel of like an awkward family gathering. Like there's people, you're all family, right? But you don't like each other. And there's like the couple of family members that the rest of the family hates. And so all of those family members kind of do whatever they can to take these shots at the 2 family members that they don't like. That's what I felt like. That's like the analogy I would use for this Big 12 Media Day. It was like Thanksgiving with a dysfunctional family. I hadn't heard or seen really much about Brett Yormark, who's now the commissioner of the Big 12. But I got to admit, during the first, his opening piece, the opening interviews, his opening speech, whatever you want to call it, I was kind of impressed. I thought, I felt like he kind of has the leadership and direction and just business mind to make the Big 12 as prosperous as it can be. Now, I'm not saying he's the type of guy that's going to come. I mean, he's not going to come and make the Big 12 the SEC. He's not going to come and make the Big 12 the Big 10. He's not going to make it the ACC. He's not going to make it the old Pac-12. But I think he's got enough vision and enough leadership qualities about him that he can make that conference be as good as it can be. Which, honestly, the last 10, 15 years of leadership for the Big 12 conference has just been terrible. It's been stagnant. It's been arrogant. It's been useless, basically. It was like, the Big 12 was almost like the NCAA, like just status quo, and then we don't care about anything else. And I think that's one of the reasons Texas and Oklahoma really struggled with the Big 12 and were really looking to get out of the Big 12. Just no sort of vision for the future and no plan to get to a vision if you had a vision. So I was really impressed with Brett Yormark in his opening piece. He kind of went off the rails a little bit later in some interviews, but I think the Big 12 is in good hands with him. I think I think he'll find a way to get them to be the best they can be, which is all he could really do, right? But boy, oh boy, was there a lot of sour grapes coming out of this Big 12 media day. Yormark, I don't know what the context of the question was. Someone asked him about recruiting with Texas and OU leaving. He said that Texas and OU hadn't been running recruiting in the Big 12 because they haven't been to the Big 12 title game lately, which I can understand his point. But you can't argue that Texas and Oklahoma have led the Big 12 in recruiting basically since the beginning of the Big 12. So I thought that was an odd comment. And I thought it was really odd when you consider some of the comments he made earlier in his opening statements about, wanting to celebrate Texas and Oklahoma's contributions to the Big 12 and not making it sort of this feud between Oklahoma, Texas, and the rest of the Big 12 members and the Big 12 staff. I thought it was interesting that he pointed that out, and he went out of his way to point that out during his opening remarks and in the initial sort of Q&A session that he did. And then he comes in there and takes the little jab at Texas and OU to tell them they haven't been in the Big 12 title game, which they haven't. Fair enough. Then you got Mike Gundy. Someone asked him about Bedlam. He says, Bedlam is history because of OU, basically. They wanted to go to the SEC, so Bedlam will be no more. He really went out of his way to try to blame all this on Oklahoma. I don't know. There's no reason why rivals can't play out of conference. Texas and Oklahoma used to do it all the time. South Carolina and North Carolina do it. South Carolina and Clemson do it. You don't have to be in the same conference to have a rivalry. So I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I'm sure there's been discussions between those two schools about what they could possibly do or what they might possibly do. But Gundy says it's over and it's Oklahoma's fault. And he did it with a lot of bravado. Like almost like Oklahoma is running away from Oklahoma State, which is interesting because under Mike Gundy, Oklahoma State is 3-15 against Oklahoma. They couldn't even beat Oklahoma this year when Oklahoma was a 6-7 team. Probably the worst football team. Not probably. The absolute worst football team Oklahoma has had since before Bob Stoops was there. They couldn't beat him. Couldn't beat an Oklahoma team that Texas absolutely trounced. Texas Tech beat at home. TCU destroyed. Had a tight end basically playing quarterback for a lot of the season. The guy that acts like he's not scared of Oklahoma and everything is Oklahoma's fault, couldn't beat that guy and has a 3-15 record against that school. I mean, if I was Mike Gundy, I would probably find any excuse possible not to ever have to play Oklahoma again as well. Then you got Tim Wisner, the deputy commissioner of the Big 12, that sits there at a podium giving, and this is all on TV. This is not like, this is the kind of crap you would expect people to say because they think it, but you wouldn't expect them to say it on TV. He says, I don't think Texas and Oklahoma left because of money. And actually, he wasn't even talking about Oklahoma. He was talking specifically about Texas. I don't think they left because of money. They already have all the money. We all know about the resources Texas has. This was more of a decision about affiliating with a specific group of schools. And then he goes on to say that they would rather get beat by Alabama and Florida than K-State and Iowa State. Which is funny because I think Texas has won the last 6 against Kansas State. Has historically owned Iowa State. Now, Iowa State has the upper advantage, the upper hand in this, it's not a rivalry, series. The last, here lately. He then went on to say that Oklahoma was just a reluctant bride. That Texas put Oklahoma in a precarious position, and that Oklahoma didn't really want to leave the Big 12 and join the SEC. Well, I got news for Tim. It's absolutely about money. Texas is going to make $10 million more per year, roughly, under the SEC's new media deal, which is a 25% increase from what they were receiving from the Big 12. And not only that, the Big 12 is talking about let's play Thursday night games and Friday night games. Texas and Oklahoma don't want that. Thursday and Friday night games are for teams that know that if they play on Saturday, nobody's going to watch it. That's what Thursday and Friday night games are for. Really, Thursday and Friday night games are for varsity football, JV football, junior high football. Not for college football. And it's not just about the money, but it's about going to a league where there are other big brands. The SEC has, man, I did it on a show. I should have looked it up. Like the most profitable brands in college football are all in the Southeast. Are very heavily populated in the Southeast. You've got your Oklahoma State, your Michigans, Notre Dame, stuff like that. But if you look at like the top 25, there's like, I think it was 12 SEC schools in the top 25 of revenue. So Texas and Oklahoma went out, and not only did they get more money, but they just created more excitement in their fan base. They created more excitement in recruiting. They're probably not going to ever have to worry about playing a Thursday and Friday night game. Really, all this was by Tim Weisner was a big shot and a parting shot at Texas about being the bad guy. He's just pushing the bad guy Texas narrative. Texas, he literally said Texas, in no uncertain terms, made Oklahoma go to the SEC. That's what he said. Which I think again, I'm not plugged into Oklahoma politics from an athletic perspective whatsoever. Everything I've heard out of the Oklahoma side of all of this was they've been trying to do this for a while. They've had contact with the SEC for a long time, much like A&M did. When the Southwest Conference busted up a long, long time ago, A&M was having talks with the SEC, and they've been in talks with the SEC for a long time. And they finally pulled that deal off. What I also heard was the ex-Oklahoma president was completely against moving to the SEC. And so it was a timing deal. It took him being not there and the timing being right for Oklahoma and Texas to both make that move, and that's what happened. It didn't have anything to do with Texas being the bad guy. The big bad Texas. And then I thought another thing that was interesting is Yormark was very excited about his new Big 12 spot, his new commercial. And in this commercial, it talked about basketball national championships and talked about other championships, but it failed to mention 3 football national championships. And interestingly enough, Nebraska, Texas, and OU are the 3 teams that have won the national championship as members of the Big 12. I thought that was interesting. I don't necessarily think that's a parting shot. I think, though, if I was the commissioner of the Big 12, I would want to remind people that the Big 12 has had success at the highest level of the main sport in college athletics. And then perhaps the most hilarious commentary at a Big 12 Media Days was Joey McGuire. You got to love Joey McGuire. Like, I totally understand why the players want to play for Joey McGuire, and I totally understand why the Texas Tech fan base has gotten so behind Joey McGuire. He is a rah-rah guy. I said it last year. You know, Joey McGuire, I don't know how great of a coach he is. And he's a head coach. He probably doesn't have to be that great of a coach. So I'm not saying that negatively. His job is to lead that organization, get the right coaches in there that do have to be good coaches. His job is to get recruits to come to West Texas and want to live in Lubbock for 3 or 4 years. His job is to work with the athletic department on what that program needs to take the next step. And his job is to motivate these guys when they get them on campus and when he gets those coaches that are the real coaches in there. So, again, he's a CEO, right? Like, I don't know that he's a great football coach. I know he had a ton of success in high school football in Texas, which probably means he's a pretty good coach. But it also could mean that he's just really clued into what drives people. And I think that's really what he's the best at, is finding out what drives people. So Joey McGuire says our QB room is the best in the Big 12, maybe the country. And it's just total nonsense. He said despite losing a first rounder, which I'm trying to think of the last really good defensive lineman at Texas Tech, and I keep going back to Monte Rager. I don't know if Monte Rager was a first-round draft pick. I assume he was a pretty high draft pick, and he had a whale of a career not only at Texas Tech but even in the NFL. Quick story time about Monte Rager. When I was a sophomore in high school, we played Waxahachie in the second round of the playoffs. And Monte Rager was on that Waxahachie team. And I watched him. We ran the option a lot out of the I formation, sometimes out of like a really stacked backfield, like a TI stacked backfield. But we had a guy that played quarterback for us named Robbie Hampton, who was drafted by the Blue Jays to play baseball right out of high school. He went and did that for a few years. Didn't really work out for him. So he decided that he wanted to try his hand at college football. So he joined Arkansas and became a 2-year starter at Arkansas at quarterback. And he wasn't just an arm. This kid could run. Really athletic kid. Good athlete just all around. I mean, Robbie Hampton was the type of dude that could just pick up any sport and he'd be good at it. And then we had another guy named Basil Mitchell who played running back at TCU and was good enough to keep LaDainian Tomlinson on the bench for a season. Went on to play running back in the NFL for the Green Bay Packers. So picture that. We got two guys that are that talented in our backfield. And I watched Monte Rager. You know, defensive end's job on an option play is to, in some schemes, now it changes, but in most simple high school schemes, the defensive end goes unblocked. The quarterback drives to the defensive end, If he's not there, he takes the ball up the field. If he is there, he pitches, right? I watched Monte Rager stretch Robbie Hampton out and then go chase down Basil Mitchell on the pitch for a big loss. That's how good Monte Rager was in high school. Wound up at Tech, had an amazing career at Tech, went on to the NFL. Anyway, despite losing this first rounder that Tech had this year at defensive end, their defensive line's better. That's like saying that the Texas running back room is better without Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. It might happen. They might be better. But you don't say it. And you don't really believe that. And I know he says nothing comes out of his mouth that he doesn't believe, because they were asking him about the whole running through Lubbock thing again. And then you got Sonny Dykes up there running his mouth. Just a really interesting shit show at the Big 12 Media Days. Lots of shots at Texas and Oklahoma, which I expected. I figured a lot of the conversation, a lot of the question from the media would be about Texas and Oklahoma's departure, and it was. Moving on to Sark, I thought his I never don't think Sark says great things. I think Sark is always on point with what he's trying to communicate and how he communicates it. A lot of the conversation and the questioning for Sark was revolving around, the Texas Longhorns being picked by the media to win the Big 12. First time that's happened since 2009, which is the last time Texas won the Big 12. And I think Sark finally gets it. I'm not sure the first couple of years at Texas that Sark really understood how much these Big 12 teams hate Texas and how high they will play during a Texas game. I don't know if that happens to one team in the SEC. I'm not saying it doesn't. I just don't know. I don't know if there's one team in the SEC that all the rest of them just absolutely hate. I don't think so. But there is certainly one team in the Big 12 that they all hate, and that's Texas. And I think he's finally getting that, and he made a lot of commentary about he understands now that all these teams are going to be gunning for him. And he talked about how the team has acknowledged that they are picked to win the Big 12 by the media. But he also follows that up and says, none of that matters. He says, I came to Texas to be in this position, to have high expectations, to win championships. These players all came to Texas for the same reasons. What was going to define us is what we actually do on the football field. And I think that's a good approach. I think you do have to go. You cannot hide from the fact that people have high expectations for you. That won't work because the media, the fans of other teams, they're always going to talk. Watch. If Texas loses a game this year in the Big 12, all you're going to hear about is how, here we go again. All these expectations for Texas and they can't do it. And you're going to hear, we thought Texas was back, even though almost zero Texas fans will ever say anything that stupid. That narrative is almost 100% driven by the media. But that's what'll happen. So you can't hide from it. You got to acknowledge it. And he says they've done that. And now they're focused on going and winning the Big 12. Not worried about the SEC because that's next year. I thought another really cool thing that Sark did. Sark's had an amazing run of recruiting the last two recruiting classes. But he didn't forget to mention all of these guys that he inherited from the Tom Herman era that are still here, that are contributing. And I thought that was kind of cool because you don't hear that all the time. It's real easy to get focused on, especially when you talk about the roster and the personnel on the team. it's real easy to get caught up, and I think fan bases are the worst about it. You know, the shiny new toy, right? But he really made a point to point out that, you know, there's guys in this program that have been here that have played on some bad teams and have seen some bad stuff. And I think they've got experience now. They've been developed now. And I think they're hungry to go out there and win a Big 12 championship, and maybe even a little more. We don't know. We'll see what happens. Join us next week. We'll have some more recruiting updates. We'll break down that O-line room. I'm excited about that. Those are my boys, the big guys. Talk about the Baylor matchup in week 4. That'll be an interesting one. Texas was able to squeak by with a win against Baylor last year. Subscribe to the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, or you can go to horntakespodcast.buzzsprout.com. Subscribe there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click the bell to get notifications. Find us on TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook at Horntakes. Shoot me an email at horntakespodcast@gmail.com with all your comments, questions, concerns, and criticisms. I love them all. You guys have a good weekend. Hook 'em.